Tonight we're going back to the late 1980s, to a time of VHS tapes, wood-paneled station wagons, yellowed wallpaper, and phones still tethered to the kitchen wall. It's the era of slasher movies on grainy videotapes and kids riding their bikes until the streetlights came on. And in a small Midwestern town that looked like it could have been plucked out of any family sitcom, a 17-year-old girl left for a babysitting job and never came home. Before we get into it, a quick heads up. This is a dark story involving the murder of a teenager. There are no graphic details, but there is violence, fear, and the kind of lingering unease that sticks with you after the video ends. If that's something you're not in the headspace for right now, absolutely take care of yourself first. Also, one more important note. Tonight's case is a fictional murder mystery, told in the style of a true crime case file. The people, places, and events you're about to hear are invented, but they're built out of patterns that show up in real investigations, real small towns, and very real human psychology. So as you listen, you can still think like a detective, question the decisions, and ask yourself what you would have done. Because here's the core of what we're looking at tonight. A quiet Ohio cul-de-sac in October 1987. Two little kids asleep in their beds. A babysitter who vanishes without a trace. A body found the next morning by the river. A town that decides very quickly who must be to blame. And then a piece of DNA decades later that points somewhere else entirely. Was justice ever really done in this case? Or did everyone, from the neighbors to the detectives, fall in love with the wrong story? As we walk through this, I want you to pay attention to the moments where your brain automatically picks a suspect, where something feels so obvious that you almost stop examining it. Because those moments matter. They're the same moments that can shape an investigation, a trial, and someone's entire life. Our story starts in the fictional town of Maple Hollow, Ohio. If you imagine every small Midwestern town stereotype rolled into one, Friday night football games, a single main street with a diner and a hardware store, a factory on the edge of town. That's Maple Hollow. It's 1987, the factory still hums night and day, and the local mall is the coolest place within a 50-mile radius. On the east side of town is Brookside Lane, a narrow cul-de-sac lined with ranch-style homes and carefully trimmed hedges. It's the kind of place where people leave their front doors unlocked and kids cut through each other's backyards without anyone thinking twice. Living halfway down that cul-de-sac are Tom and Valerie Wilkes. Tom works nights at the factory when he can grab overtime, and Valerie does hair at a salon in the strip mall. They've got two kids, 4-year-old Megan, who loves My Little Pony and wants to wear the same pink sweater every single day, and 2-year-old Josh, whose main hobbies are banging pots together and chasing the family's orange cat. The Wilkes are not rich. Their house is a little cluttered, the couch is secondhand, the wallpaper in the kitchen is peeling in one corner. But they're proud of what they have, and they're determined to carve out a little bit of adult life, date nights, birthday dinners, the occasional party with friends at the VFW hall. That's where Lisa Hart comes in. Lisa is 17, a high school senior at Maple Hollow High. She has feathered hair she spends way too long on every morning, a denim jacket covered in enamel pins, and a Walkman that never leaves her backpack. She's one of those kids who hovers somewhere between cliques, honor roll grades, marching band, but also a part-time job at the movie theater and friends who smoke behind the gym. If you ask her little brother, she's a little bossy. If you ask her teachers, she's a little distracted. If you ask her mom, she's too soft-hearted for her own good. Lisa's dream is to leave Maple Hollow, go somewhere with skyscrapers and coffee shops that stay open all night, become a journalist, and tell stories about things that actually matter. Babysitting is her way out, or at least part of it. Every Friday night, she's on Brookside Lane, watching the Wilkes kids. They pay fairly, they're home when they say they will be, and the house has cable, something Lisa's family doesn't. It's an easy way to earn cash while finishing homework and, occasionally, sneaking in a scary movie after the kids go to bed. But like a lot of 17-year-olds, Lisa also has a complicated personal life. Up until a few weeks before that October night, Lisa had been dating a boy named Danny Cole. Danny is 18, a high school dropout with a beat-up Camaro, a pack of cigarettes rolled into the sleeve of his t-shirt, and big plans for his terrible garage band to make it out of this town. He got his first probation for shoplifting cassette tapes, he gets into fights when he drinks, and parents in Maple Hollow tend to say his name with a sigh. To Lisa's mom, Danny is exactly the kind of boy you don't want your daughter sneaking out with. To Lisa, he was a rebellion, a rush, and then a problem. Because over the summer, Danny went from fun to possessive. He'd show up at Lisa's work unannounced, sulk if she had to cut a phone call short to go to dinner, ask who she was talking to, and why she was spending so much time with those band nerds. He didn't like that she wanted to apply to colleges out of state. He didn't like that babysitting took up her Friday nights. 2 weeks before the murder, witnesses would later say, the two of them had a loud argument in the parking lot behind the movie theater. One of Lisa's co-workers remembers seeing Danny slam his palm against the hood of her mom's car while she sat in the driver's seat, crying. Another swears he heard Danny say, "If I can't have you, nobody else will." Now, we don't know exactly what he said or what he meant. People misremember. Small towns love to add spice to stories. But we do know one thing. The next day, Lisa broke up with him. And she told at least 2 friends that she was done with jealous guys, and that if Danny kept bugging her, she'd go to the police. Around this same time, something else started happening on Brookside Lane. Valerie would later tell detectives that on 2 separate Friday nights, a car she didn't recognize rolled slowly past their house. It wasn't unusual for teenagers to cut through the neighborhood, but this car drove so slowly it made her hairs stand up. It was an older model sedan, maybe a Nova, dark blue or black. She couldn't see the driver clearly, just a shape, a hint of a mustache, the glow of a cigarette. She mentioned it to Tom once, half joking. "Watch, it'll be some creep watching our babysitter." Tom shrugged it off. "This isn't Detroit," he said. "It's fine." Then someone started calling the Wilkes number on Friday nights. The first time Lisa picked up and heard nothing. Just breathing. She hung up thinking it was a prank. The second time the caller asked in a low voice, "Is this Lisa?" She said yes, asked who it was. The caller didn't answer. Just exhaled, then hung up. When she told her best friend Kelly about it at school, Kelly tried to make light of it. "Probably your ex being dramatic," she said. Lisa half agreed, half shrugged. She didn't tell her mom. She didn't tell the Wilkes. Strange phone calls are the kind of thing teenagers brush off until they become impossible not to. All of this leads us to Friday, October 23rd, 1987. It's one of those chilly Midwestern fall nights where the air smells like wet leaves and distant wood smoke. There's a homecoming game at the high school, and half the town is headed to the stadium. The Wilkes are going to a birthday party for one of Tom's coworkers out by the VFW hall. Your classic, nothing special Friday. At around 6 o'clock, Lisa stands in front of her bedroom mirror, feathering her hair one last time. She's wearing jeans, a soft blue sweater, and white canvas sneakers that have seen better days. Her denim jacket, covered in pins from bands and random slogans, is draped over the back of her chair. She debates taking it, decides not to. She'll be inside all night. She slips on her watch, grabs her school books and a VHS tape she's rented, some cheesy romantic comedy she doesn't really care about, and heads for the front door. Her mom calls after her, "Be home by 12:30. And call if they're running late." "I will," Lisa says. She leans down, kisses her baby brother on the head as he makes a half-hearted grab for her backpack. She steps out into the cold and pulls the door shut behind her. On Brookside Lane, the porch lights are popping on one by one. A dog barks down the street. Somewhere, someone is playing With or Without You on a boom box loud enough for the whole block to suffer through. Lisa gets to the Wilkes house around 6:20 p.m. Valerie answers the door with a frazzled smile, already halfway into her makeup. Megan runs to the door in socks, begs Lisa to watch her favorite cartoon tape. Tom is in the kitchen, buttoning his shirt and yelling to nobody in particular about where his keys are. It's hectic, normal, forgettable. They do the usual quick rundown. Megan has a little cough. If it gets worse, there's cough syrup in the cabinet. Josh has been on a kick, where he wakes up around 10 asking for water. There's leftover pizza in the fridge if Lisa gets hungry. The couple's number is on a magnet by the phone, just in case. Lisa settles onto the couch with the kids, pops in a tape, and by 7:30, both children are drifting towards sleep, sticky with juice and smelling like baby shampoo. At 7:42 p.m., according to phone records that will later be pulled, Lisa calls her best friend Kelly from the Wilkes landline. The call lasts 11 minutes. They talk about the homecoming dance, about a teacher who once again mispronounced someone's name, about how Kelly's mom won't let her wear a particular dress. At some point, Lisa mentions the weird phone calls and says, laughing but not really joking, "If I get murdered on one of these babysitting jobs, you better tell 2020 I saw it coming." Kelly tells her she's being dramatic. They say goodbye. Kelly goes back to studying. Lisa hangs up, checks on the sleeping kids, and turns the TV to some late-night movie with the sound low. From here, the timeline gets fuzzier, because we're relying on later recollections, neighbors looking through the fog of 30-plus years, and a police department that did not write everything down the way we wish they had. What we know is this. Around 8:30 p.m., there's another call to the Wilkes house. Lisa answers. This time, the caller doesn't breathe or ask her name. They just say quietly, "I see you." Witnesses differ on whether she later told anyone those exact words, but phone records show an incoming call lasting 18 seconds from a payphone at the Maple Hollow Mall. The call ends with the line going dead. There's no way to trace who stood at that metal payphone, quarter in hand, looking out over the parking lot as they dialed the Wilkes number. Around 9 p.m., the kids are fully asleep. The cul-de-sac outside is calm. At some point around this time, the Wilkes' next-door neighbor, a 55-year-old retired mailman named Howard Whitaker, gets up from his recliner to make a cup of tea. He glances out his kitchen window and sees the Wilkes' porch light flicker on and off twice. This is not unusual, he will later say. Their porch light switch is finicky. He doesn't remember noticing anything else, no strange cars, no shadows. But he's also not watching the window. He's halfway through a rerun of Magnum P.I. and trying to remember whether he mailed his niece's birthday card. What we also know is that at 9:17 p.m., the local 911 dispatch receives a hang-up call. The line is open for 4 seconds, a faint sound, maybe the TV, maybe static, then a click. The number shows up on the dispatch console as belonging to the Wilkes address. This is 1987. There's no automatic callback system yet, just a flickering green display and a tired operator. The dispatcher tries to call the number back. It rings and rings. After a minute, she shrugs, logs it as a likely misdial, and moves on. 2-bar fights, a noise complaint, and a report of fireworks will come in that night. A hang-up from a good part of town doesn't feel urgent. Around 9:40 p.m., a 14-year-old paperboy named Jason cuts through the intersection near Brookside Lane on his bike. He's running late on his route, his fingers numb in the cold. As he coasts past, he notices a dark blue sedan idling at the mouth of the cul-de-sac, headlights off. He can make out a man in the driver's seat, maybe in his 30s or 40s, maybe with a mustache, but Jason doesn't slow down. He's got a bag of newspapers to finish, and strange parked cars at night are just part of the background. He will later tell police that the man didn't look at him. He was staring straight ahead. At 11:32 p.m., Tom and Valerie pull into their driveway. They're a little earlier than they'd planned. The party was fine, but Valerie's feet hurt, and Tom has an early shift the next morning. The house is dark except for the glow of the living room TV through the curtain. Right away, Valerie feels something in her chest, not full-blown alarm, but off. The porch light is off, which is normal. The front door is closed, also normal. But when she puts her key in the lock and turns, there's no resistance from the chain. They always flip the chain when they leave at night. She opens the door, calls out softly, "Lisa? We're back." No answer. The TV is on, showing static. The couch pillow is on the floor. Lisa's open history textbook rests on the coffee table, next to an empty glass with a faint ring of juice at the bottom. One of the kids starts crying from down the hall, a panicked, confused wail. Valerie rushes to the bedroom. 4-year-old Megan is sitting up, tears in her eyes. 2-year-old Josh is still asleep, thumb in his mouth. Valerie does the quick mom check. No bruises, nobody looks hurt, nobody seems like they've been through anything. She scoops Megan onto her hip and whispers, "It's okay, it's just us." "Where's Lisa?" Megan asks. It's the question that will hang over this house for decades. Tom walks through the kitchen, calling the babysitter's name. The back sliding door is open an inch. A cold draft snakes in. On the counter, one of their drinking glasses is in the sink, in pieces, as if someone dropped it and tried, clumsily, to rinse the shards away. On the doorframe near the kitchen, there's a thin reddish smear, like someone dragged a finger there. Tom would later say he thought it was ketchup at first, then realized they hadn't had anything with ketchup in days. On the living room floor, the phone lies half under the couch, receiver off the hook. Within minutes, Tom is jogging down the cul-de-sac, pounding on doors, asking neighbors if Lisa walked home, if anyone saw her leave, if anyone has eyes on a teenage girl in a blue sweater walking alone in the dark. Nobody has. At 11:46 p.m., Tom calls 911. "Hi, my name is Tom Wilkes. I live on Brookside Lane, and our babysitter is missing," he says. His voice is already threading into panic. "We just got home, and she's not here. The kids were alone, the back door was open, the phone was on the floor. I don't know what's going on." Within 15 minutes, a patrol car pulls up, followed by another. Officers check the immediate area, shining flashlights into the side yard, the garage, the Wilkes car. They search the house again, opening closet doors, looking under beds, checking behind the shed in the backyard. They don't find Lisa. What they do find, in the cold damp grass just beyond the back patio, is a partial boot print. It's large, men's size 11 or 12, and it's not Tom's. The tread has a distinctive pattern, something like interlocking rectangles. One detective, kneeling in the wet grass, curses under his breath. They do not have plaster in the car to cast the print. They cover it with a cardboard box for the night, and tell themselves they'll come back in the morning to get a better impression. As the clock inches past midnight, officers widen the circle. They check the ditch that runs alongside Brookside Lane, the empty lot at the end of the street, and the small wooded area that leads toward the river. They drive the neighborhood slowly, spotlight sweeping. AK 9 unit is requested from the next town over, but it's a weekend and takes time. At around 3 a.m., with no sign of Lisa, Detective Ruth Alvarez arrives on scene. She's one of the few women in the department, tough as nails, hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, wearing a trench coat that somehow makes her look both exhausted and very, very awake. She's been woken up from a dead sleep for this call, and she does not like what she sees. An empty babysitting house. A phone knocked off the hook. A back door left open. A smudge on the doorframe that looks an awful lot like blood. 2 little kids who slept through what might have been a struggle in the next room. She also doesn't like the way the officers are already talking, sotto voce, as if they know what happened. Bet she snuck her boyfriend in, one says quietly, picking at something under his fingernail. Yeah, or just took off, another shrugs. Girls her age do that. Ruth has seen enough cases start exactly like this, and she knows one thing. Even if Lisa did invite someone over, even if she left willingly at first, something went very wrong. 17-year-olds do not leave toddlers alone in a house in the middle of the night and just disappear. She orders the scene sealed. She calls for crime scene technicians. She takes note of the boot print and orders it photographed. She has the broken glass collected, the phone wiped for prints, the little smear on the doorframe swabbed. She talks to Tom and Valerie separately, making them walk through the night in excruciating detail. And then, around 7:30 the next morning, the case stops being a missing person and becomes a homicide. 2 fishermen, launching their boat at a small, muddy ramp 3 miles downriver from Brookside Lane, spot something in the reeds. At first they think it's trash, an old jacket maybe. But as they get closer, the shape resolves into something human. They pull back, motor sputtering, and one of them starts yelling for someone to call the sheriff. When detectives and paramedics arrive, they find Lisa Hart's body half hidden among the tall grass by the water's edge. She's fully clothed, lying on her side, one arm bent at an awkward angle. There are faint marks around her neck, bruising on her arms, and dirt under her fingernails. Her watch is missing. Her denim jacket is nowhere to be found. It's cold, damp, and absolutely quiet except for the river and the low murmur of stunned law enforcement. The medical examiner will later determine that Lisa died from strangulation sometime between 9:30 and 10:30 p.m. There are no signs of sexual assault. There are signs of a struggle. She fought whoever did this to her. Near the body, crime scene techs collect a few key pieces of evidence. A cigarette butt crushed into the mud, with a smear of lipstick on the filter. A cheap cardboard matchbook from a bar called the Rusty Anchor, 2 towns over, and a length of coarse, tan rope fibers snagged in the grass, as if something had been tied, yanked, and then removed. Lisa didn't smoke. The Wilkes didn't smoke. The Hart family didn't either. Back at the station, under the harsh fluorescent lights, the investigation begins to take shape. Detective Alvarez sits down with a yellow legal pad and draws a circle, writing Lisa in the middle. Around her, she starts to map the people in Lisa's life. Family, friends, co-workers, ex-boyfriend, neighbors, anyone who might have known she'd be alone in that house on a Friday night. The first and most obvious people to clear are Tom and Valerie. Both insist they left the house around 6:30 p.m., drove straight to the party at the VFW hall, arrived around 6:50, stayed until after 11, and then drove home by the main road. They say they didn't call home to check in. They trusted Lisa. They say they didn't give anyone else the house key. At the party, about 20 people can confirm they were there. There is, however, a complication. Multiple witnesses recall Tom leaving the hall around 9:30 p.m. to buy cigarettes because the vending machine in the lobby was broken. One guy swears he saw Tom's car pull out of the lot. Another says he saw him come back with a pack of camels around 10. Tom insists he was gone no more than 15 minutes, that he drove to a nearby convenience store, stood in line behind 2 other customers, and came right back. The cashier at that store will later tell police she doesn't remember seeing him at all that night. On its own, that's not damning. Memories are messy. But that little gap in time, the same window when Lisa was likely attacked, is enough to plant a seed in a detective's mind. Then there's the ex-boyfriend. When officers knock on Danny Cole's door the day after Lisa's body is found, he answers in a faded band t-shirt, eyes bloodshot, hair messy. He looks, in every way, like a kid who slept through his alarm. But as soon as they say Lisa's name, his whole body stiffens. He tells them he hasn't seen Lisa in 2 weeks, not since she went psycho and broke up with him. He admits they argued, sure, but he denies ever threatening her. He says he spent Friday night with his band, practicing in his friend Mike's garage on the south side of town from 7 p.m. until almost midnight. When police talk to Mike and the other band member, the stories are mostly consistent, but not perfect. Mike says Danny showed up a little late, around 7:30, and that at some point around 9 he stepped out for a bit to get more beer. Mike thinks he was gone 20 minutes. The other bandmate, who was half asleep on the couch most of the night, says it could have been longer. Danny smokes Camels. So do half the adult men in Maple Hollow. Danny drives a beat-up Camaro, not a blue sedan. Mike's family, however, does own a dark blue Nova, which his parents say never left their driveway that night. Police take note of the car, the cigarette brand, the jealous ex-boyfriend, and the fact that Lisa had reportedly been receiving creepy calls. And then they learn about the rumor in the movie theater parking lot, the argument, the hand slamming on the hood, the alleged "if I can't have you" line. In a town already wrestling with fear and grief, it doesn't take long for this story to harden into something like fact. There's one more person who lands near the center of the web, the neighbor, Howard Whitaker. Howard lives alone, keeps to himself, and has the kind of socially awkward manner that, fairly or not, draws suspicion. He admits to seeing the Wilkes porch light flicker that night. He admits he was up, alone, watching TV, with a clear line of sight to their driveway and some of their backyard. He says he didn't see or hear anything else out of the ordinary. When detectives ask to look inside his garage and backyard shed, he agrees without a lawyer, without hesitation. In the shed, they find a coil of tan rope that looks an awful lot like the fibers found near Lisa's body. When they ask where he bought it, Howard says, the hardware store on Main. The same place everyone buys rope. He's right. It's generic utility rope that half the houses in Maple Hollow probably have. But the visual is powerful. Shy, single man, rope in the shed, teen girl dead a few miles away. Another story starts to form. From the very beginning, you can almost feel confirmation bias at work here. The town, the officers, maybe even you listening to this, your brain wants to land on a suspect that fits a certain mental picture. The jealous ex. The secretive neighbor. The husband with a gap in his alibi. We've all heard those stories. We've seen those episodes of unsolved mysteries. Our brains reach for patterns they already know. Meanwhile, evidence collection in 1987 Maple Hollow is not what you'd hope. The boot print in the Wilkes backyard is photographed, but nobody ever makes a proper plaster cast before the rain 2 days later turns it into a muddy blur. The cigarette butt from near Lisa's body is bagged, but it's handled without gloves at least once. The matchbook from the rusty anchor is logged, then tossed into a paper evidence envelope along with the rope fibers, unlabeled. The smudge of blood on the Wilkes doorframe is swabbed, but there's no DNA testing here yet, not in this county. They can't do much more than note that it's human blood, and that the type is O positive, a blood type shared by about 38% of the population. They do what they can with what they have. They fingerprint the Wilkes house. No unknown prints stand out. They dust the sliding glass door. Nothing. They search the riverbank for Lisa's missing watch, her jacket, the murder weapon, any sign of a car having pulled up and sped away. Nothing solid turns up. Still, the investigation barrels forward. Detective Alvarez brings Danny in for a formal interview. She reads him his rights. He waives them, leaning back in the hard plastic chair, arms crossed. On the tape, you can hear the defiance in his voice, the edge of panic. He insists he had nothing to do with Lisa's death. He admits he called her twice since the breakup, but says she never picked up and he hasn't called in at least a week. When confronted with the phone records from the mall payphone, he shrugs and says, "Lots of people go to the mall." When she asks about the line witnesses say he used, "If I can't have you," his jaw tightens. People say a lot of stuff when they're mad, he mutters. Doesn't mean they mean it. He agrees to provide hair and blood samples for comparison testing, which at the time mostly means hair microscopy and blood type. His blood type is A negative. The blood on the doorframe is O positive. The hairs found on Lisa's sweater are an inconsistent mess. Some hers, some animal, some too degraded to be sure. The local paper runs a front-page story with his photo under the headline, "Police question ex-boyfriend in babysitter murder." Parents cut out the article, pin it to bulletin boards. Kids whisper in hallways. Danny becomes a villain in the town imagination before any charges are ever filed. Howard, the neighbor, goes through his own small-town trial. People side-eye him at the grocery store. Someone leaves an anonymous note in his mailbox that just says pervert. He's brought in for questioning twice. Each time, he tells the same story. He saw the light flicker, he made tea. He turned his TV up louder because of the police cars later. He never heard a scream. His rope, when compared to the fibers from the riverbank under a microscope, looks similar but not uniquely identical. The sheriff, under pressure to at least do something, asks if Howard will take a polygraph test. He agrees. The results come back inconclusive, which, in the court of public opinion, might as well mean guilty. Tom, meanwhile, feels the weight of subtle suspicion. Detectives ask him, more than once, if he ever felt attracted to Lisa, if there was ever any inappropriate contact. He is horrified, offended, then oddly quiet. He admits that she was a pretty girl, that she reminded him a little of his younger sister, that he always tried to be careful not to be alone in the house with her. The gap in his alibi haunts him. His story about the cigarette run never quite lines up tidily with witness recollections. He didn't keep the receipt. The cashier doesn't remember him. It's the sort of small, muddy detail that wouldn't prove guilt in court, but would absolutely light up a true crime message board, if those had existed in 1987. Weeks turn into months. The cold, clinical phrase, ongoing investigation, becomes a fixture in the local news. The police conduct searches at the homes of Danny, Howard, and even the Wilks, looking for rope, blood-stained clothing, anything that could tie them concretely to Lisa's murder. They don't find it. The rusty Anchor bar, whose matchbook was found at the river, becomes a brief focus. Detectives drive out, show Lisa's school picture to patrons and staff. A few people say she looks familiar, but no one can place her definitively. A bartender remembers a man coming in alone late on the night of the murder, wired like he'd had too much caffeine or something, but she can't describe his face beyond white guy, mustache, maybe a work jacket. The bar is the kind of place where men stop on their way back from late shifts at the factory or long drives in delivery trucks. Dark wood, neon beer signs, a jukebox in the corner. The matchbooks are free, stacked in a bowl by the door. Hundreds, maybe thousands, go out into the world every month. Within the Maple Hollow Police Department, pressure is mounting. People want an arrest. Parents want to know if they should be afraid of letting their daughters babysit. Reporters are calling from bigger cities, sniffing around for a story about a murdered babysitter in a safe town. It's in this atmosphere, thick with fear and rumor, that a quiet shift happens inside the case file. Without anyone saying it outright, the department's working theory begins to solidify around Danny. On a whiteboard in the squad room, his name is circled in red. Underneath are bullet points: jealous ex, violent temper, argument in parking lot, no rock-solid alibi, smokes Camels. There are theories about what happened. One goes like this: Danny, angry and drunk, tires screeching, drives to Brookside Lane sometime after 9. He parks down the street, walks up to the Wilks' house, maybe gets Lisa to let him in just to talk. They argue. Things escalate. He grabs her, she fights back. One of the kids might stir, he panics, drags her out the back door, pushes her into his car, and drives to the river. There, in the dark, he strangles her, smokes a cigarette, drops the butt, and drives away. Is it possible? Yes. Is it the only story that fits? Not at all. And that's where the danger lies, in mistaking a plausible story for the only story. Despite all the pressure, the prosecutor in the county DA's office won't file charges against Danny. There's no physical evidence tying him to the scene. No fingerprints, no blood, no fibers, no solid eyewitness placing him near Brookside Lane. A case built on rumor, old arguments, and a missing half hour might make for a gripping TV episode, but in front of a jury, it could crumble. The neighbor, Howard, is quietly dropped as an active suspect after it becomes clear that nothing in his home, his car, or his life connects him to Lisa beyond proximity. The rope in his shed matches rope in half the sheds in the county. His polygraph is deemed unhelpful. He goes back to his lonely life, now shadowed by a cloud he can never fully shake. Tom and Valerie are treated, outwardly, as grieving parents and victims. Behind closed doors, detectives still talk about Tom's cigarette run, about how stress and marital tension can make people do terrible things. But again, there's nothing concrete. The case stalls. By the time the 1980s give way to the 1990s, the Hart case, as it's labeled in the dusty filing cabinets, is cold. Years pass. Tom and Valerie move out of Maple Hollow, chasing a fresh start they never quite find. The Wilkes kids grow up with a hole in their childhood, a fuzzy memory of a babysitter who played with them on the floor and then never returned. Danny leaves town under a cloud of suspicion, bouncing between low-wage jobs in neighboring counties, always aware of eyes on him, whispers behind him. Howard dies of a heart attack in his living room, alone, a decade after the murder. Maple Hollow changes in the ways small American towns do. The factory cuts shifts, then shuts down. The mall loses anchor stores. The rusty anchor closes after a drunk driving scandal. VHS gives way to DVDs. The phone on the kitchen wall becomes a plastic relic people forget to take down. And somewhere, in an evidence room in the basement of the police station, a cardboard box sits on a shelf, its label fading. Hart, L. October 23, 87. If our story had been told a little earlier in history, it might end right there, with a cold case file, a lingering suspicion about a bad boy ex, and no real answers. But our story doesn't end in the 1980s. It jumps forward. In 2008, a new detective named Mark Dempsey transfers to the Maple Hollow Police Department. He's in his early 40s, personally obsessed with cold cases, and very aware that forensic science has taken a few leaps forward since the days of hair microscopy and blood typing. One of his first projects is to pull unsolved cases from the archive and see which ones have physical evidence that might be suitable for DNA testing. He goes through old burglary files, assault cases, and then his hand lands on the Hart box. Inside, he finds what you'd expect from a late 80s small-town investigation. Handwritten reports, Polaroids, scrawled witness statements. But he also finds something that makes him sit up a little straighter. A small envelope with that cigarette butt, the matchbook, and the rope fibers, all still sealed. He also finds swabs from Lisa's fingernails, preserved in little tubes, labeled in a neat, careful script. It's a small miracle that they weren't tossed during some earlier evidence purge. Mark does what nobody in the late 80s could have done. He sends the cigarette butt and the fingernail scrapings to a crime lab for full DNA analysis. Months pass. Other cases pull his attention. Life goes on. And then, one afternoon, a lab report lands on his desk. The fingernail scrapings, it turns out, contain a partial DNA profile from a male that does not match Lisa, does not match Tom, does not match Danny, and thanks to old medical records, does not match Howard. It's someone else entirely, someone who has never been arrested for a felony, never been swabbed and entered into CODIS, the National DNA Database. It's frustrating, but also huge. It suggests that Lisa hurt her attacker, that she clawed at him, that she left his genetic calling card on her skin. Whoever he was close enough for her to fight. The cigarette, but also yields a DNA profile. This one is cleaner, a good, strong sample. Lab techs can tell it comes from the same person as the one under Lisa's nails. Same male, same profile. It's like watching a figure sharpen from fog, details sliding into place. One man. One unknown man. But again, when that profile is run through CODIS, there's no direct match. No hit. Whoever killed Lisa was never convicted of a crime that required him to give DNA, or he lived his whole life under the radar. For some detectives, that's where the trail would end. But Mark is stubborn, and the year is 2008, edging into a new era of forensics. He learns about something relatively new at the time, using DNA not just to match individuals, but to identify possible relatives in certain databases. Over the next several years, this will become a whole new field, genetic genealogy. For now, Maple Hollow is too small, too underfunded to be on the cutting edge. But by the mid-2010s, labs working with law enforcement begin offering the service more widely. Eventually, Mark convinces his superiors to let him send the unknown male profile off for a genealogical workup. This part of the process is slow, almost painfully meticulous. The lab compares the mystery profile to DNA from people who have voluntarily submitted their genetic information for ancestry testing. They look for shared markers that indicate a family connection, then build family trees backward and forward, trying to land on the branch where someone, some cousin, some uncle, some grandfather, could be their unknown killer. After a long stretch of silence, a report comes back. They found a cluster of matches all pointing toward a particular family line in Ohio and neighboring states. The closest matches are second or third cousins, distant but connected. On a big whiteboard in his office, Mark starts sketching out this new tree, names inside boxes, lines connecting them. Many of the relatives have lived their whole lives hundreds of miles away. But one name jumps out. Gregory Greg Nolan. Born 1954. Worked as a maintenance mechanic for an industrial supply company. Lived in Maple Hollow, Ohio, for about 18 months in the mid-1980s while working a job at the local factory. Drove, according to a DMV record, a blue 1978 Chevy Nova. Smoked, according to his medical records, a pack a day. Frequented, according to a former co-worker, that dive bar on Route 7, what was it called? The Rusty something? The Rusty Anchor. Greg moved away from Maple Hollow in 1988. He bounced around the region for a while and died in 1999 of a heart attack, never married, no kids. So now you have this picture. A man in his early 30s, living in Maple Hollow in 1987, working a job that might have taken him past Brookside Lane, smoking Camels in his blue Nova, grabbing drinks at the Rusty Anchor with its free matchbooks by the door. And you have DNA from Lisa's fingernails and from a cigarette but left near her body that is, according to the genetic genealogists, statistically very likely to belong to him or to someone extremely close on his family tree. Mark tracks down some of Greg's surviving relatives. A niece in another state agrees to talk. She remembers visiting her Uncle Greg in a small rental half an hour from Maple Hollow when she was a kid. She remembers him as quiet, weird about girls. She tells Mark about one night, years after Lisa's murder, when a true crime show about a different case came on TV and Greg muttered, "People make such a fuss over some babysitter." She didn't think much of it at the time. Just mean drunk talk. Now she isn't so sure. A former co-worker remembers Greg coming into work one morning in the late 80s with scratches on his hands and wrists, joking that his cat fought dirty. Another remembers him drunkenly bragging at the Rusty Anchor that he choked a girl once who wouldn't shut up. Again, at the time, that sort of bar talk, while disturbing, was easy to dismiss as gross male bravado. In hindsight, it feels heavier. Mark tries to get a direct DNA sample from Greg, exhumation, personal items, anything. But Greg was cremated. His old apartment was long since cleared out. His toothbrush, his hairbrush, anything that might hold his genetic code has been ground under the wheel of time. He does, however, manage to obtain a DNA sample from a close living relative, and the lab confirms that their profile matches the unknown male in Lisa's case in exactly the way you'd expect from that family relationship. Statistically, the odds that the unknown killer is not Greg or a near-duplicate relative are very, very small. So what do you do with that? Legally, not much. Greg is dead. You can't arrest him, can't put him on trial, can't cross-examine him about where he was on October 23, 1987, or why his DNA would be under a dead teenager's fingernails. Ethically, emotionally, it feels like an answer. Here, finally, is a man who fits the physical evidence, who was in town, who drove the right car, who smoked the right brand, whose DNA is on the cigarette left by Lisa's body. A man who, unlike Danny or Tom or Howard, had no reason to ever be near that babysitter, that house, that cul-de-sac, no reason except as a predator. But the human brain is funny. Even when you're given a strong new story, a story about a stranger predator, a chance encounter, a random act of violence, it's hard to let go of the old ones. Some people in Maple Hollow still believe, deep down, that Danny had something to do with it. Maybe he hired someone. Maybe he was there that night with Greg. Maybe the genealogical stuff is wrong. They remember the angry ex, the parking lot argument, the way he scowled in his mugshot, and they feel that old pull of confirmation. Others still side-eye Tom. They remember the cigarette run, the missing receipt, the way he withdrew after the murder, drinking more, smiling less. Some hold on to the idea of the neighbor, the rope, the flickering porch light. Because here's the thing. In the story where a stranger named Greg kills Lisa, the rest of us don't get to feel in control. You can't say, well, if Lisa had just broken up with her boyfriend differently, or if Tom had been more honest about something, or if the neighbor had spoken up, this would have been avoided. You have to face the idea that a random man with a car and a rope can show up in your quiet cul-de-sac and shatter your life. And that's terrifying. So sometimes we cling to the story where the danger was inside the circle we already knew. The ex. the husband, the weird neighbor. Those stories are awful, but at least they make a certain sense. They give us rules. Don't date boys like that. Don't marry men who drink too much. Keep an eye on the loner next door. A stranger in a blue Nova, smoking a Camel in the dark, following a babysitter home because he saw her once at a diner and decided she was his? There's no easy rule for that. What we're left with in the fictional town of Maple Hollow is something like a half-solved puzzle. On paper, the most likely scenario now looks like this. In the weeks before the murder, Greg Nolan, working around town, notices Lisa, maybe at the movie theater, maybe at the mall, maybe at the Wilkes house when he's out on a job. He learns her routine, follows her once or twice on a Friday night, figures out that she's sometimes alone with 2 small children. On October 23rd, sometime after 9 p.m., he parks his blue Nova at the end of Brookside Lane, watching the Wilkes house with the lights low. He calls from the mall payphone earlier in the night, just to hear her voice, just to confirm she's there. At some point after 9:15, he approaches the house, maybe knocks, maybe tests the back door and finds the old latch easy to work. Inside, Lisa is alone in the living room, kids asleep. She's nervous from the earlier phone call, but it's been quiet. When she hears a noise at the back door, she might think it's the wind. When she hears the door open, she might think it's Tom and Valerie home early. We don't know exactly what happens next, but we know she ends up fighting him. We know she reaches out, clawing at his hands, his arms, enough to capture his DNA under her nails. We know a glass breaks. We know the phone gets knocked to the floor, maybe in a frantic attempt to dial for help, perhaps explaining that abandoned 911 call. We know at some point he gets control, maybe with a rope, maybe with his bare hands. He drags or carries her out the back door, across the grass, leaving that partial boot print, loads her into his car, and drives to the river. There, in the dark, he strangles her, smokes a cigarette with shaking hands, flicks it into the mud, and leaves her lying in the reeds. Then he drives away. He washes his hands. He goes to work a few hours later with scratches on his wrists and a story about a mean cat. The town swirls with rumors about ex-boyfriends and neighbors, and he goes unnoticed. Does that story fit all the details perfectly? No. Does any story? Also no. Every reconstruction of a crime like this is, at best, an educated guess hung on a skeleton of evidence. There are always gaps. But in this version, we finally have something the 1980s never really had, a suspect who aligns with the physical evidence more cleanly than the old favorites ever did. Someone whose involvement doesn't require stretching timelines or ignoring inconvenient lab results. In a case like this, one of the most haunting questions is, what would have been different if the investigation hadn't locked so quickly onto the usual suspects? If the officers had been more open to the idea of a stranger? If the boot print had been cast properly, the cigarette preserved more carefully, the riverbank canvassed for witnesses who might have noticed a blue Nova where it didn't belong? Would they have found Greg while he was still alive? Could he have been connected to other attacks, other near misses, other girls who got in a car with a man they thought they knew well enough? We'll never know. And that uncertainty is part of what makes stories like this, fictional or real, stick under your skin. Because at its core, this isn't just a story about one babysitter in 1987. It's a story about how our minds work when we're scared, how we reach for familiar villains, how we sometimes prefer a wrong answer that feels neat to a messy answer that's probably closer to the truth. It's about a small town that wanted, more than anything, for danger to be something they could point at, something they could lock up, something they could leave behind bars. Instead, the likeliest danger turned out to be a man who passed through their lives quietly, left almost no trace, and then vanished before anyone could call him to account. Today, in this fictional Maple Hollow, there might be a small memorial to Lisa near the river, a bench with her name on it, a faded photo in the high school yearbook room, an aging detective who still opens that case file once in a while, even though the official paperwork says closed, suspect deceased. And there are the people left behind, her parents, if they're still alive, the Wilkes kids, now adults, the ex-boyfriend who will forever be that angry young man in the newspaper clipping, a town that never really decided which story to believe. So now I'm going to hand this over to you. If you were sitting in that Maple Hollow jury box, looking at the evidence as we've laid it out, no rumor, just the facts, where would your suspicion land? Would you be satisfied naming Greg Nolan as the likely killer, even without a trial, and letting the others go in your mind? Or do you still find yourself looking back at Danny, at Tom, at the neighbor with the rope, feeling like something doesn't quite add up? What detail in this story sticks with you the most? The hang-up 911 call, the cigarette in the mud, the flickering porch light, the missing half hour from a party, or the way a whole town's attention can be steered toward one person and away from another. Drop your theory in the comments. Who do you think killed Lisa Hart and why? And as you do, remember, whether we're talking about a fictional story like this or a real case in the headlines, the way we tell these stories matters. Behind every name is a human being with a life that didn't start and end at the crime scene. Behind every suspect is a person who can be crushed by suspicion, even if they're innocent. Behind every monster is often someone who blended in so well we never thought to look twice. That's the real chill of a 1980s murder mystery like this one. Not the shadow in the doorway or the car idling at the end of the block, but the realization that sometimes the scariest part isn't what we don't know. It's what we think we know for sure.